Greetings. It's Monday, April the 14th, 2025. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. Trade war with China rages on. It's a real gamble and a real gambit on the part of the Trump administration. It's not 100% if it's going to work or not. Two personality cults at odds with each other, Trump and Xi. There's been a little bit of a break. iPhones and Apple computers are now exempt from the 145% tariff on goods coming from China. Now, there's a lot more to this story, and I'll be coming back to it a bit later. It's a very telling case, though, of being careful about what you wish for, as you may get it. This morning, the biggest story is, of course, the attempted assassination of Pennsylvania's Governor Josh Shapiro by arson attack, of all things, on his official residence. The man and his family were only a few minutes away from being burned alive. I don't know if anybody here knows much about house fires, but after a flame starts, a house can be completely engulfed in anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, even ones as large as the official residence of the governor of Pennsylvania. The question is, how did the perpetrator get in? How did he get in without the state police finding him? There's a lot of questions that will be answered at some point. Now, one thing that is not being discussed is that Shapiro was accused by a former state police employee back in February of having a hand in the attempt on President Trump's life. Now, nothing seems to have come from that, but it was a pretty formal criminal complaint that was filed. Local authorities ignored it. Shapiro has also been implicated in election fraud pertaining to the 2020 election, which, of course, Pennsylvania went to Biden in that case. Now, a lot of people are putting this off to cranks. Time will tell if the recent opening of the investigation into the 2020 election will go anywhere. But of all the people in the United States, this guy is at odds with the powers that be at the moment. In fact, he was, one thing you should point out here is that he really, really does not like President Trump. In fact, he was considered a possible running mate for Kamala Harris during last year's election. There's no love lost between Governor Shapiro and President Trump. And a look into Mr. Shapiro's background indicate he once served in the Israeli Defense Forces for a while, and also worked for the Israeli Embassy in Washington for some time. There's no official word as to whether or not he's a dual citizen of the United States and the State of Israel. But you see all the possible motivations we have here for something like this. In fact, I don't recall any attempted murder of an American official by fire any time in recent history. So this is a real odd thing. Now, the man accused of the crime is someone named Cody Balmer. He's age 38. He's from the Harrisburg area. That's the capital of Pennsylvania. The initial reports are that he was down on his luck and was living out of a post office box. That's interesting. Yeah, instead of a lone gunman, he's a lone Molotov cocktail tosser. Again, how would anybody be able to get into the governor's residence? Really? Is the security that lax? This morning, you're probably going to see everybody in government positions that are not under official protection really worried. Remember, most people in this country in government do not have formal protection. Members of Congress, for example, members of the House of Representatives and most senators, they don't have any bodyguards per se. And if you look at how easy it would be to get up to somebody's house with maybe 3 or 4 people, Molotov cocktails, pour gasoline all over the place, by the time everybody on the second floor woke up, it would be too late. So things are a little different in the United States today. I guarantee you we're going to find some interesting things coming out about this, but the motivation of this individual, it's interesting how they're coming to that conclusion so early. We'll see as the story progresses. I predict it's going to go deeper and much darker. Meanwhile, more skullduggery on the other side of the country. Remember that young man who was working for OpenAI, who blew the whistle on that company's alleged illegal use of copyrighted material? And then later he wound up dead in his apartment, supposedly by suicide. Well, the family of Suchi Balaji understandably didn't let that one go. And after having arranged for a second autopsy on their son's body, it was discovered, at least they're making the claim, that he was shot twice in the head. It seems a second bullet was missed by the coroners. Wow, shooting oneself twice in the head, that's a trick, if there ever was one. This just confirms what those of us who did even a little bit of reading up on the case already knew. That young man, that young genius, was murdered. There were signs of a struggle, blood was all over his apartment, and there was reports that part of a wig was found at the scene, which, according to the family, was never properly investigated by the police. I wonder why. OpenAI, the company that young man worked for, are the people behind ChatGPT. That's the leading AI system out there. The company is currently valued at well more than $150 billion. This is another story that's going to go into some dark places, I predict. Please check out the interview Tucker Carlson did with the man's mother a couple months back. It's about 2 hours long, but it's worth watching. Now, elections in Canada are scheduled for the 28th of this month. That's going to be interesting to see how that goes. The U.S. and Canada, what were considered really, really tight countries at one point, are now at odds. The contest in Canada will be between the conservative opposition Canadian candidate and the incumbent, who is a globalist who spent much of his life overseas, serving the financial interests that rule this world. That's going to get interesting. Stay tuned on that. Oh, and many people in the Canadian province of Alberta, that's out on the west side of Canada, they're making a lot of noise to either become independent or join the United States. There is a movement out there for that, and it's gaining traction. Not just a handful of yahoos, but people who are serious. They're tired of how the Canadian government tells them everything they can do and not do, and they're kind of a rough and tumble bunch. They're cowboys of the kind that the United States was famous for. And don't laugh at it. They have plenty of oil, Alberta. They have plenty of oil, and that makes independence or joining the United States as the 51st state quite possible. So that'll be interesting to follow. Oh, and speaking of elections, Conor McGregor, a mixed martial artist, is running for president of Ireland. You might have seen him. He showed up at the White House not too long ago and met with President Trump. Mr. McGregor is a very colorful character, to be sure. He has no political or even managerial experience. So calling him the Irish Trump is a bit of a misnomer. He's basically just a guy that likes to fight, and, well, that's not a description of an Irishman. I don't know what is. There is an understandable rise in nationalism in Ireland, and it's getting stronger and stronger, especially given how that nation has been enduring a foreign invasion for some years now, and suffering, well, what happens? Sexual assault, murder, crimes of all kind. Oh, it's a mess. Violent backlashes in Ireland are increasing. You're going to see that more than, say, in the United Kingdom, which has already been conquered by the invaders. Perhaps Ireland will get back to what we saw in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. That's when the IRA was active in killing British soldiers and anyone, including fellow Irishmen, they perceived as their enemies. There's a good chance that'll happen again. My guess is that rather deadly skill set is still deeply embedded in that national gene pool. So if you have a nationalist coming into office, and again, a lot of people aren't giving him a high probability of success, but they said the same thing about Donald Trump, didn't they? The helicopter crash in New York City, the one where a family of 5 visiting from Spain and the pilot were killed when the helicopter came apart and crashed in the Hudson. Like you always see these days, lots of guessing by so-called experts, pilots, people that claim to know what they're doing. I'm going to say this again. Wait until the Federal Transportation Safety Board comes out with its findings. Otherwise, it's just guessing. People that get killed in that situation, they deserve to be investigated. The truth always takes time, and it always takes patience. Otherwise, you're doing the internet equivalent of rubbernecking, and we have too much of that these days. Now, back to trade and business and the economy, because this affects all of us. Remember, be careful what you wish for. You may get it. Donald Trump won election for, among other reasons, trying to bring the United States back to its former glory as a manufacturing and exporting nation. Making America great again means making stuff in America. And that's a noble cause, which is a term I'm sure you've heard before. But he's not going to be able to make this happen just by signing an executive order. Bringing manufacturing back to America. Bringing our jobs back to America. Well, there's a lot more to it than just wishful thinking. Now, in the last 40 years or so, the United States has gone from being a real manufacturing country to being, well, what was sold as a service economy. The United States used to be the center of entrepreneurship. Let me give you a personal story. In Tokyo, at what's called the Diet Building, in Japanese Kokaigijido, it's the national legislature. It's their version of the Capitol. That's where they have an upper house and a lower house, and they debate, pass bills, take bribes, the usual thing. And in the lobby, during a tour I took once of that building, was a big brass mailbox. And on it was the Japanese kanji characters for outgoing mail. And on the bottom of this big brass mailbox was the name of a company in St. Louis. I don't remember the name of the company, but I distinctly remember it was in St. Louis. It was a company that made things out of brass. That mailbox was installed when they were building the Diet Building back in the late 1800s. And I thought to myself, my goodness, back in the days of sailing ships, there was a company in St. Louis, Missouri, that was able to find out about a contract to build a brass mailbox in the new legislative building that was being constructed in Japan, bid on it, win the contract, find someone who knew the proper Japanese characters for outgoing mail, build the thing, ship it to Japan, have it properly installed. And it was a nice mailbox. You know why? Because during World War II, when anything American was not only frowned upon, but was dissuaded, they kept the mailbox there. Last I heard, it was still there. It probably will be until that building is rendered into dust. But that sort of American entrepreneurship doesn't really exist at this point in time, at least not on a large scale. That enterprising spirit needs to be rekindled. The United States became a manufacturing superpower after World War II, primarily because everyone else in the world didn't have any factories left standing. They had been obliterated in the Second World War, so the U.S. by default was able to export. When people got back on their feet, that's when you started to see Japanese and German cars. That's when you started to see shipbuilding move overseas, all sorts of things. It's going to take more than just the bright ideas of the Trump administration to get the United States back into manufacturing. You can't just wave a magic wand and have a new factory there with a bunch of people that can go in and make stuff. The United States doesn't make anywhere near as much stuff as it did before. In fact, since the Clinton administration took power, the U.S. has closed 90,000, that's 90,000 factories. They're not going to reopen immediately. The U.S. is also going to have to start going back to thinking outside of its own borders. You have to start shipping things overseas, and that requires a different level of attitude towards the rest of the world. Before I was into journalism in the 1980s, I was a young man and I was in the trading business in the Far East. It was an exciting time. I came from the United States where everything was miserable and depressing except for the rock and roll music. Everybody was out to make a buck. Everyone was working hard. Everyone was excited about selling around the world. People were learning languages. People were traveling. People were cutting deals, finding out what different markets required. I learned at that time that American companies could be separated into two categories: very advanced and very sophisticated and very educated about how the world works, and very primitive and backward. There was no in between. You might find a wonderful product being sold in Illinois or Montana or Arizona, and if you tried to ship it overseas, they wouldn't know what to do, and they didn't care. Jimmy Carter did one thing right, or at least tried to, and I think of him in the same class as I think in the recent President Joe Biden, one of the worst things we ever had in the White House. And believe me, I really didn't like that man, but there was one thing his administration tried to get us to do, and that was to convert to the metric system. And speaking from firsthand experience, you have no idea how frustrating that is to the rest of the world, that the U.S. operates on a totally different system, weights and measures. I think it's the only country left, maybe except Burma or Myanmar, whatever it calls itself these days. United States, everyone wants to just speak English and no other language. Other countries, people learn several languages. Merchants that operated in a global environment traditionally learn several languages. Oh, and by the way, the U.S. does not have an official language. In fact, we have a couple of states where English and Spanish are official languages of law and of commerce and of government regulation. I believe they're Arizona and New Mexico, possibly Texas. I'll have to check into that. It's going to require a totally different attitude to change this country around, and not just by a handful, by millions of us. Has anyone ever worked in a factory? It can be quite monotonous. It can be quite mind-numbing. It could be argued that it's better than staying at home, collecting welfare and watching television all day or playing computer games. But then maybe it isn't. Americans have become quite literally fat and lazy over the last several decades. And it's going to require a complete change in consciousness. If there is going to be a manufacturing base in this country, it's going to have to get kick-started pretty quick. Now, we can do that. In the 1930s, this country was in a depression. When World War II started, it ramped up industrial capacity to something we hadn't seen before or since. We were turning out Jeeps one every 30 seconds, bombers once every 25 minutes, 24/7 for years. And with far fewer resources and a far smaller population than what we have now. The United States can do this, but it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be without a lot of elbow grease. A lot of elbow grease. Trump has started putting these pieces into place. But China makes so many things that we can't do without right now, including the components for small manufacturers. I was watching a report the other day about the music industry, the people that make accessories for electric guitars and things like that. Some of these factories have only 7 or 10 people in them, and a lot of their components are made in China. And these tariffs could end up killing those small manufacturers. Being made in the USA literally means something is made in the USA, and that requires labor, that requires work, that requires dedication, that requires people investing in infrastructure, which does not exist at this point. Although it's necessary for this country to go back to making stuff, because the people that make the money are the people that make the stuff, it's not going to be easy. So all of you out there with your red MAGA hats and waving Trump banners and all this other stuff, it's now time to walk your walk and talk your talk. You're going to have to go out there and start learning. Again, when I was growing up, there was something called Junior Achievement, which was a program you found in most junior high schools and high schools on how to start businesses, how to calculate profit and loss. And I checked it out. It's still around, but I haven't heard about it for years. It seems to be operating in other countries more than the United States. Interesting. The educational system in this country is not exactly pro-business or pro-free enterprise. They're more comfortable with Karl Marx than they are with Henry Ford. No, we have a lot of work to do in this country, and it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick, and it's going to be painful. But the only alternative is to continue down the road that we've been on for many, many years. Trump is the guy that's steering the ship, but it's up to the rest of us to man the thing and get to where we're supposed to be going. That's it for today. If you appreciate my work, please like, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and share with your enemies, especially if you want to see them working in factories again. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My handle there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. This podcast originates at Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com, and you can send me a direct message there if you so choose. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the Deep State must be destroyed, and you can't have a revolution without offending somebody. Good day.